Hello and welcome to episode 40 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by MetsmerizedOnline.com. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, along with my co-host and MMO executive editor, Mike Mayer. And Mike, I don't know if 3-4 was the start of the road trip that we thought the Mets were going to be, but here we are. Initial thoughts of this first road trip here against the Marlins and the Brewers. Some good, some not so good. Couple of 9-inning or 10-0, 9-0 games. Got shut out in 20 innings. The Mets offense did. Scherzer didn't look good, but other than that, not a bad road trip. So, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough to take too many positives away from the road trip. To finish 3-4 is obviously a disappointment, especially after starting 3-1, and not just the record. How, like you said, how they lost games too. A couple of blowouts. Offense just went cold for a long stretch, and at the same time, the starting pitching got knocked around. So. Certainly not the vibe that Mets fans wanted going into the home opener that is now on Friday. Um, I guess the Mets decided they were going to cheer the fan base up a little bit. Well, I say that by bringing Francisco Alvarez up, but unfortunately, it happened because Omar Narvaez is going to be out 8 to 9 weeks, and I mean we're talking small sample size between spring training and the start of the year, but Narvaez looked very good
Mm-hmm.
offensively and defensively for the Mets. So um, obviously, Mets fans are excited for Francisco Alvarez and what he can bring, but Narvaez was one of the steadier players that the Mets had seen in the really brief start to the season. So obviously, you never want to see anyone get hurt, and you don't want it to be a guy like that that had played a pretty good role in the Mets start of the year. But yeah, I mean, I mean, we still haven't seen Verlander pitch as a Met. David Peterson laid an egg the last time out. Carlos Carrasco showed diminished velocity. Some questionable bullpen decisions we could talk about with Buck too. I mean, and then just yeah, the offense as a whole, until the other night when Lindor and Alonso came on, um, it's been pretty much cold outside of them, and McNeil's had a couple of
Mm-hmm.
good games. So, um, yeah, you gotta hope better days are ahead for the Mets, starting with the home opener on Friday.
Yeah, McGill's pitching that obviously, and he didn't look too spectacular in his first start of the year. Obviously, that was kind of rushed because the Verlander news, whatever. You touched on Verlander real quick. Looks like he's a couple more weeks away, so we'll probably see him in May. Hopefully, that kind of feels like what it is. They said he's a couple more weeks away, but he's still throwing, whatever. Narvaez, yeah, something that seemed like a simple thing, a little tweak. They pull him out precautionary, and now it turns into 8 or 9 weeks. Maybe on the plus side of that, maybe now the Mets will get a little more pop with Alvarez up here. I don't think anybody thought he was going to be the first guy to come up out of that core in AAA. But maybe it'll be a nice little shot in the arm for them. I believe Tomas Nito's starting the opening tomorrow, and Alvarez is coming off the bench. So Mets fans who are going like myself tomorrow are going to get to see Alvarez, starting, but he'll be there. Yeah, I think the main theme in general, besides the offense, which we'll get to, but just how underwhelming the starting staff has been so far, especially Scherzer. I mean, that first game in Miami, really, it was one bad pitch. Outside of that, he looked pretty good. He seemed to be like himself, pretty sharp. But that start in Milwaukee, I mean, I don't know if he's ever given up back-to-back home runs. I didn't look it up, but I would imagine a guy like that probably hasn't. So that's got to be pretty humbling for him. I know we'll talk about the pitch clock and stuff, but I wonder now that was a game. Obviously, the Mets lost 10-0. Offense wasn't doing much. Those were quick half innings. You wonder how much the pitch clock and things of that nature has something to do with it. Scherzer looked pretty beat at points. Not making excuses, obviously, but I think that's something to factor in there when your offense isn't really, giving you time to rest in between those innings. I don't know if that's another factor to it, but just has not looked sharp. Starting staff in general hasn't. You mentioned Buck, just kind of with the bullpen, some questionable things. I think outside of a couple of, obviously Ottavino yesterday and or 2 days ago, or yesterday, excuse me, and Drew Smith giving up the tying runs. the other day, in the sixth inning, the wink or whatever. I think the pen hasn't been horrible. I think Robertson's been pretty good. Maybe you want to say he brought in the Miami series, kind of like with too many runs or whatever in one of the games that they won. But I think as a whole, it's the blaring thing so far as the starting staff, and obviously the offense hasn't gotten going. Alonso and Lindor yesterday had nice games, which is big. The offense is going to go how those two dudes go. McNeil's had a bit of a pulse so far. Marte as well has done all right, but you know obviously Escobar not doing anything to start the season has not helped. And just in general, they, obviously, not scoring 20 straight innings to start the year is not something you want to see. So just, how worried about you, how worried are you, I guess, about the current state of the Mets offense right now?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure I'm that worried. I mean, obviously, it's very early. We're talking 7 games. Um, they faced some pretty good pitching. I kind of ironically, one of the probably the second best pitcher they faced, Corbin Burns.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of lit up. Pete Alonso became the first hitter to hit 2 home runs in a game against him.
Wow.
But I mean, other than that, I mean, Freddie Peralta is a very good pitcher.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus Luzardo might be the early favorite for like breakout pitcher in the National League.
Sure.
He looks dominant, a lefty that throws 100. You don't see that very much. And they faced Sandy Alcantara too, so the reigning Cy Young. So they've faced some pretty good pitching. I guess Wade Miley would be kind of the game where you're like, hey,
Oh yeah.
that's the guy you got to get more runs off. That's the one that kind of stands out the most to me. But I have no stats to back this up, but it always feels like the Mets struggle against two guys, rookies like early in their career that
Sure.
really aren't have high expectations, and soft tossing lefties. I feel like that's two guys they always struggle against, and they did so against Wade Miley. Um, yeah, I think my biggest concern coming into the year was third base once that they sent Beatty down
Right.
and Escobar hasn't hit well. Guillorme hasn't hit as his replacement. I don't mind Guillorme playing because at least then you have some defense at third
Right.
base instead of Escobar. But at some point, you have to get offense from third base, which is always one of the bigger offensive positions. So to continue to get nothing there, that's the obvious weakness I think going forward. Um, the rest of the guys, I mean, I'm not worried about Lindor. He had a great game. He's going to get hot. Alonso had a great game. He's going to get hot. McNeil's going to be him. All the outfielders are going to do what they do. So the questions haven't changed. Catcher Nito's gotten off to a really slow start, so let's see how much they're going to play him and how much Alvarez is going to play.
Right.
And Alvarez was off to a good power start in AAA. He had 2 home runs and a double in 4 games, but he'd also struck out in 50% of his at bats. He had 8 strikeouts and 16 at bats, so that's certainly something to look for. I mean, Alvarez didn't look great offensively this spring because we know he's coming off an ankle surgery. So the Mets certainly didn't plan on having him up this early. So it'll be a question of how much he plays and how effective he's going to be
Right.
offensively. So yeah, the two biggest questions are what we thought they were going to be, the catcher and third base. And I guess Escobar got a little bit of a reprieve for a little bit that Beatty had right thumb inflammation. Luckily, it was just that that happened on Tuesday.
Sure.
He didn't play Wednesday, didn't play Thursday, but he's expected back in the Syracuse lineup on Friday. So, I mean, once he's back in the lineup and shows the Mets he's healthy, then again, this ticking time clock is on for Escobar. I mean, this is exactly what I talked about potentially happening is
Yep.
that Beatty doesn't start the season up and Escobar struggles to start the year, and then that's what we're talking about. Um, and I just don't think it's a good thing to linger over the team. Um, Once Beatty's healthy and hitting again, I mean, there's no reason to expect that he's not going to be hitting in AAA. That's all he's done is hit in AAA. And I mean, it's not just that it's hitting too. I mean, Yeah, when his two home run game, both of the home runs were off lefties, and he was down in the count and had two strikes on him. So I mean, both of those home runs are extremely impressive that he had in that game, and he's looked good outside of that too. The defense has continued to look good at third base um, in the minors. So yeah, let's let's see what Alvarez does. I think that's look the Mets. Obviously, we've talked about it for a long time over the last years that the Mets could use some pop, and Alvarez could be that guy that adds some pop. I think it all comes down to the interesting piece comes down to how much he's going to play, how much Buck is going to go with the young catcher behind the plate.
Yeah, no, and I would assume as long as Alvarez is hitting, they're going to figure out a way to get him in the lineup. You would hope, whether it's catch and DH and wherever they, obviously they don't want to overexpose him probably behind the plate, but if the bat's playing, they're going to have to do that. I guess offensively, I keep going back to now. Man, it would have been nice to have Carlos Correa. Man, it would have been good to have that extra bat in there. You wonder how much that's going to rear its ugly head now. Obviously, we talked about it at the time. It's something the Mets obviously felt strongly about with the ankle, whatever. But now we're seeing kind of the flip side of that with the offense getting to a slow start. Would have been nice to have a little bit more of a lengthened out lineup. But on the starting staff side, a little bit. Scherzer, I don't want to get into a ton just because, listen, he's a veteran. We understand the pedigree. You would think a guy like that is going to right himself, right? Again, I don't know if it has to do with a little bit, the game sped up a bit more now with the pitch clock. He's got to get his legs underneath him a little bit more than maybe he's used to, whatever it is. Leaving a lot more pitches over the middle of the plate than we're used to seeing. We know he's good for a home run or two every start. That's kind of his MO. He's a fly ball guy. But pitches over the middle like that he was doing. Obviously, guys cranking balls you don't want, but I think you have to give him a little bit of a pass because you would think he's going to right the ship at some point and be the guy that he can be. Someone like Carlos Carrasco, though, whose fastball velocity was down pretty significantly, a couple miles an hour at least in that start. He wasn't touching above 90. Didn't look to have command of anything. You wonder how much of a leash a guy like him has, and when you think you might see someone like Dylan Bundy step into the rotation. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, Carrasco's got an infinite leash because McGill and Peterson are already in the rotation, and
Yeah,
Bundy's still pitching in extended spring.
got it.
I mean, Bundy's still not making any starts at Syracuse yet, so he's not even ready for that. So, I mean, Carrasco at least has a leash until Bundy's going to need to make 3 or 4 starts in
Yeah.
AAA before he's ready. So, I think, yeah, I mean, Carrasco not pitching well is obviously concerning, but I think more concerning was the diminished velocity later in the outing. And I thought what was also concerning was the fact that everyone saw the diminished velocity. Gary Cohen was talking about it, everyone
Mm-hmm.
was tweeting about it. And then Buck, for some reason, still sent Carrasco out for the fifth inning, and he proceeded to walk the first two guys, and stuff exploded from there. Um, I guess I don't understand what Buck was thinking there. This was a guy who had just given up a couple of runs in the inning, showed diminished velocity, and had a rather high pitch count in a short span too. So that I know Buck doesn't have a ton of options because they had all these games in a short period,
Mm-hmm.
and the starters haven't gone much. But you, throwing out a pitcher like that potentially, I mean, at worst is fatigued. He was clearly fatigued at that point. Um, Sending him out there, I don't think was a wise move. And then while I'm on Buck, I might as well go to the next move that I disagree with. When they're in the tie game in the last game, he had the opportunity with Robertson and Ottavino, and he knew both of those guys were likely going to pitch. It was in a tie game, and the second inning, if the first inning went quickly, the
Mm-hmm.
second inning was going to be all left-handers.
Right.
Well, Adam Ottavino was crushed by lefties last year, especially compared to his numbers against righties. And David Robertson pitched very well against lefties
Right.
and historically has pitched well against lefties in his career. And Buck seemingly ignored that and went Robertson first and Ottavino second. Ottavino gave up a home run to a left-handed hitter to end the game. Maybe things work out similarly, but I mean similar, but these are the little decisions that Buck needs to make correctly when you have less room for error in the bullpen with Edwin Diaz hurt, Bryce Montez de Oca not available, Sam Coonrod, who was pushed to the 60-day IL today, not available. I mean, they've already had to dip into Tommy Hunter went on the
Mm-hmm.
IL, had to dip down to the minors for Denny Reyes. So um, the bullpen's gonna be interesting until some guys get healthy
Mm-hmm.
and or some other guys step up. Um, Luckily, a guy like Dennis Santana has stepped up. He's hasn't given up a run in 3 outings, and he pitched in back-to-back days, which is highly unusual. But this early in the season, um, but there's no room for error in these tight games for Buck, and I felt like he made an error in two of those Brewer games. I mean, maybe the offense doesn't do anything anyway to
Right.
win those games, but those are positions where Buck's got to improve. He's got to know the matchups, particularly with the Ottavino Robertson stuff. That's stuff that he has to know going into the game, and has to make the right decision on the field. And you can't let Carrasco go out there fatigued either. I mean, even if it means you have to go multiple innings with someone else who maybe you don't want to, you you're gonna have to make moves. You gotta bring guys up. I know the Mets are kind of in a spot there because two of the bullpen guys are out of options
Right.
with Nogosek and Santana. So
Mm-hmm.
there isn't a ton of wiggle room in what they can do. So that comes into play too. But at some point, you've got to get essentially a long guy up there. And leads us to another injury. Eliza Hernandez
Right.
was pretty much going to step into that role, and he's on the injured list too. So um, yeah, the Mets are going to have to find some innings, and hopefully the starters giving them some quality innings can help out the bullpen. They got McGill coming up, who actually looked pretty solid in his first start, and Kodai Senga coming up, who we haven't talked about yet, but outside of a rusty first inning, looked absolutely terrific. The ghost forkball was as advertised. All 8 of his strikeouts were on the ghost forkball, so I mean, I think everything is up for Kodai Senga from that start. I think that's easily the Mets' best start of the year so far, and hopefully he can build on that in his second start at Citi Field.
Yeah, and I want to touch on everything you kind of just said, but to your point about Sang, and I was going to get to him, but we'll talk about it right now. Obviously, that was the best start of any Mets pitcher so far this year. I agree there. And the stuff plays. I was going to say, obviously, the first inning there was clearly nerves, but it's your first major league start, another country, the whole deal to be expected. Settled in very nicely. That fork ball splitter, whatever you want to call it, that falls off the table like a plus changeup. We can understand why everyone's kind of falling in love with that pitch. And he throws 96 plus with the fastball. I think this year he's going to struggle with command a little bit, just getting used to everything. But I think you give him a year, and to me, he's a frontline starter. The stuff plays. That's frontline starter stuff. And I don't say that lightly, willy-nilly, or anything like that. I think he's going to struggle a little bit command this year. Again, kind of get his feet underneath him or whatever. But you give that a year, like I said, that's frontline starter stuff. Mets fans should be really excited about that. And he seems to be pretty, like I say, after that first inning settled in nicely, seems to be very poised. Obviously, was a veteran in Japan coming over here, so I think that's a plus. Obviously, Harper on the starting staff, that's a nice bright spot there. And just as far as what you're talking about with Buck and just his handling of leaving pitchers in too long and then using the bullpen, I think if there's one bugaboo, and we talked about it all last year, Buck likes to manage every game like there's 162 games left, whether it's April or it's September and the division's on the line, which I'm not even going to get into that, but you know what I'm talking about from that series in Atlanta last year in September. That's always seemed to be his Achilles heel, managing bullpens, understanding when to pull a trigger or not, when to use urgency and when not. Obviously, you just said it's hard because he's got arms going down left and right, so you want to try and get some length out of your starters. I get that. It's hard to manage. But as far as, like you said, looking at a pitcher like Karashi, who was clearly at the very least fatigued going into that, you'd have to just kind of read the game as far as what it's telling you and bring somebody in. So, over 162 now, we'll see. Again, last year he had the best closer in baseball. When you can bring that guy in the 8th inning, you can use him in different ways. You look very good at times. this year we'll see really kind of, how Buck can manipulate a bullpen. I think we'll really see how, if that's going to rear its head with him or not. Obviously, like I said, they're down on him, so you can give a little bit of a pass, but we kind of know what he is in that regard as a manager. So we'll see what happens there. And Sanger was really good, and that's a nice bright spot. But in general, early on, I don't know if you feel the same. I think early last year that team caught a lot of breaks. A lot of things went their way. Not happening as much yet this year between health and other stuff. Alonso got called out on an infield hit that the first baseman's foot was like a foot off the bag. That was a really bad call. Things like that. But they got to be resilient. It's an older team. This is the stuff we were kind of worried about. We're hoping for the best, but this is when you have guys that need to step up here, and you just hope that with the way the scheduling is, which also we'll get into that, if it's a balanced schedule, why the Mets playing the Marlins again in a week, and you only play each other 13 times, then you'll play each other 8 times, and it's only 5 times the rest of the year. That math doesn't math to me, but whatever. I don't make the schedule. It was a tough thing to start the year, and for a ticket holder, it was annoying. Personally, I was going to opening day today, but I completely understand then the Mets trying to use the weather in any which way that they possibly can to get an off day, because it's whoever made the schedule. I know somebody had it out for them, but that's a rough start, the way they had, the first week and a half here.
Well, and it's not just the games, but also like the game times
Sure.
with all the day games coming after travel days too. Um, that would have been the second straight series opener that would
Right.
have been a day game after a game day, which just doesn't happen. And the fact that, yeah, then you're went from Miami to Milwaukee and then
Right.
to New York, and in a short period, with there wasn't going to be the day off. The Mets ended up giving a day off on Thursday. Yeah, I the schedule doesn't make any sense to me, and Buck has kind of mentioned that essentially
Mm-hmm.
as soon as spring training started, he got to look at that schedule and talk to the schedule makers for MLB, and
Right.
was putting out his concerns about how that fact that it didn't make any sense. Um, for one of the reasons you're talking about. If it's in New Balance schedule, why are we unbalancing it by playing a team so many times
Right.
early in the season? Particularly a team that you just saw in spring training a lot,
Sure.
which is another thing that Buck mentioned.
Yep.
And then just to have they had 50 games scheduled in 54 days. I mean,
Right.
they still do. Um, the the home opener being moved back doesn't change that at all. It just kind of gave the Mets an extra day of rest, which, talking about the pitching, they certainly could have used. And I'm sure the guys, just from having those series and right off the bat, could kind of use a break anyway. So yeah, the Mets are in a tough spot to start the year. We knew it was going to be kind of a rough schedule, and the Mets certainly saw the potential for rain, which I'm not in New York, but I saw everyone tweeting about how nice of a day it ended up being.
It was sunny and 80
Uh,
today.
so the Mets took the opportunity of
Right.
the forecast when they saw it, and I mean that's smart maneuvering by them. That's their prerogative, and hopefully it certainly works out for them to have another nice day for the home opener on Friday, and they can get a win. I think everyone will forget if they get a W.
Yeah, and talking about the schedule here, right? 50 games in the first 54 days or whatever it is. You hate to use the old saying, right? You can't win the division or win the pennant in April, but you could certainly lose it. Obviously the Mets started off really, really well last year. It's going to be apples to orange, different team, all that kind of stuff. I know, but just kind of going off comparisons of how the teams are going. Obviously, that first month and a half, the Mets were beating up on everybody. It felt like they came out of the gates gangbusters, and really, obviously, set them up nicely. Obviously, we know what the Braves did in the second half as far as the division concerned, but set them up nicely, have a nice cushion to get into the postseason. So hopefully the opposite doesn't happen now this year with like all these games like we're talking about, and just they have diminished arm after diminished arm, and just hope that it doesn't get too much of a hole early. Because especially once you get guys back and healthy, like the Verlanders of the world and stuff like that, and the offense will start clicking at some point. I'm not totally worried about that, but you just don't want to get too much of a hole too quick. But then I guess on the other hand is you look at the Phillies again, won 87 games. They got the guys healthy at the right time, hot at the right time, and got in the tournament. So it's always, there's going to be that balance of this. I feel like no matter what now in baseball, you don't want to dig yourself in too much a hole, but half the league makes it. So just get hot and get one of those wild card spots, whatever. So that'll be interesting to see with the rest of the year. But before we kind of move on to the guys in AAA, the minor league guys, you give us that update. I just wanted to get, a week into the season now, your impressions of the new rules. Obviously, the pitch clock, the throwover rules, the banning on the shift. Just want to get your thoughts of what you're seeing. If you like, what you don't like, just what you think now with this new look in baseball in the first week here in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have any complaints. I mean, it's nice. I mean, I'm a baseball traditionalist, so I'm
Mm-hmm.
for the most part. So I'm gonna watch the games. I get paid to cover the Mets, so I'm gonna watch all the games. Even before that, I'm just gonna watch all the games, whether they're 2.5 hours or 3.5 hours. Um, but on the flip side, after going to minor league games before with the pitch
Mm-hmm.
clock, I certainly understand the want to speed up and to potentially grow the crowd to other fans that maybe wouldn't sit down for 3.5 hours to watch a game, but
Right.
are willing to for 2.5 hours. It has a better flow to it. It just does. I mean, to sit there in the games and there's no more slogs at all ever. It just has a better pace to it. Um, I think for the most part, from what we've heard from players, which I think is really the important views, I don't think it really. I think we know by now that all the sports writers obviously like the pitch clock rules. It's
I'll get to that.
an hour less they're at the game. We know they like it. All of us covering the team, you know that we like it. I think the important thing is how the managers, players feel, and I mean, there's certainly been cases of stuff that players didn't like, managers didn't like when Pete Alonso got incorrectly called
Right.
for a violation. But Major League Baseball came out and said after the game that they were incorrect and that
Right.
they would fix it, make sure it didn't happen again. Look, these little things are going to happen. It's
Yeah.
still a new rule. You still have new umpire. We got 10 new umpires this year, so get all these new umpires working in. It's a lot of stuff for the umpires to cover too.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's something that doesn't get talked about a ton. Is just being a major league umpire is certainly not easy anyway, and being a home plate umpire is very difficult. And then you add into the home plate umpire and all the other umpires that they have to pay attention to all these clocks, and that's a lot of pressure to put on those guys. And I think for the most part they've handled it. But yeah, I don't think there's been any huge. I mean, outside of I know Tim Anderson kind of had some issues. Jeff McNeil had some issue with the call that happened against him, and a couple other guys have been upset. But I think, especially like once we get out of April,
Mm-hmm.
everyone's going to be on the same page. If Major League Baseball thinks they need to make any more small adjustments like they did previously, they'll continue to do so. They certainly don't want players to feel like this is going to kind of diminish anything that they do on the field. So I think Major League Baseball is going to go along with them if there's any legitimate areas where they feel they need to change. With the pickoff thing, I mean, and the pitch clock kind of combined, I mean, we're certainly seeing more stolen bases,
Right.
which is fine. I've never been one that'd be like, hey, we need more stolen bases in the game or anything like that. But it certainly doesn't hurt to see. I mean, when you have more stolen bases, or at least when there's more successful stolen base attempts, we're going to see more runs. And
Right.
I think that's
Right.
what people want to see is the opportunity for more runs. Honestly, I don't even really notice the shift stuff as much. I mean, I think because you can still shift over quite a bit. I mean,
Sure.
we've seen Lindor do it to the max of
Right.
what he thinks he can do, and other teams are doing it too. And second basemen are still playing way over on pull guys. So I mean, you can shift. I mean, really, what it's taking away from is the second baseman and right field. I mean,
Right.
that's really the only thing we're not seeing to this
Yep.
point. And it's not like it's been a focus of any of the broadcast or anything, because I think that was just a focus from the broadcast. Is like, hey, this guy's standing in shallow right field.
Right.
We're going to show him to you. So now that it's not happening, we just don't see it
Right.
as much and talk about it as much. I don't think. I think it's really early, like number wise, to look at like batting average and runs scored and see if there's really any correlation quite yet to see if it's doing what Major League Baseball had hoped. Um, so yeah, I mean, I haven't seen too many issues like from a player standpoint from other than the ones that we talked about, and MLB seems to be working on. So I mean, I'm all aboard of, especially the pitch clock. I think it's kind of brought in a nice flow to the game.
Yeah, the pitch clock is doing exactly what it's supposed to. I think there's going to be tweaks to it. I think the umpire should get a little bit more discretion as far as, when they're going to start and stop the clock, certain things that happen, sort of thing. Because I do think at points players might feel like they're a little rushed. It kind of does feel like that sometimes. They kind of feel like that they're not settled, whatever. So I think things will get tweaked there. I agree. I think the shift banning has a lot less of an impact than I thought it was going to, because I agree there. I stopped noticing it really. You only really notice it now with like scribbers up the middle and stuff like that we're getting gobbled up now that it hits again and things like that, but not nearly noticed as much as I thought. And just the pickoff rule in general, I don't love it. It's getting what baseball wants. I just think that they're going to realize that that two throw over rule is going to create guys that with any sort of speed, it's an automatic stolen base after the, if they throw over two times. That's at least my opinion. You see certain guys like Ronald Acuna and stuff, they're already leaning and going after they throw a second time, So I think that there'll be maybe some tweaks there. Maybe they'll give them a third throw over, something like that. But I think the rules are doing exactly what baseball wants. And again, I don't think it's more run production. I just think it's more action, less dead time. They're accomplishing that. My only gripe, and I've talked about it with friends and things like this, is in general, the media's narrative of it just feels like this first week of the season, and I'm hoping it dissipates as this becomes normal. All I keep seeing is times of games. This game ended in 2 hours. This game is an hour less. The games are averaging 48 minutes less and things like that. And it's talking more about how the game is shorter than the game on the field. And that annoys me a bit. To a point, it almost feels like it it feels to me like they're promoting, hey, less baseball is good. And I don't agree with that. I don't think that's what they're saying. It just comes off like that to me. I don't want to hear about the time of games anymore. The pitch clock is in. We get it. It's going to cut down the time of the game. Tell me about the game. I don't care how much time it was. I don't care that Sandy Alcantara threw a complete game in 2 hours. Tell me how he pitched. Tell me how the game went. It's a lot of good stuff. Like I said, the ball's in play a lot more. They're getting the results that they want as far as Major League Baseball is concerned. Just talk about the product more on the field now instead of the time on the clock. I don't really care. That's annoying to me.
So
But
my one thing to add to this
uh-huh.
is, and I almost forgot about the negative that I don't like. It came out today
Okay.
that Major League Baseball is looking for a sponsor for the pitch clock.
I hate that.
So they're looking to cash in on the actual physical
Sure.
pitch clock at stadiums, which I'm sure they're looking at like Timex or Rolex
Right.
or
Sure.
whoever,
Yeah. Yep.
someone in that type of industry that can use that sort of sponsoring. So yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting and cheesy at the same time.
And before we get to more sponsorships, because we're going to get to that, the last thing I'll say, and again, I'm not against any of this. It's working. It's doing what Major League Baseball wants. I understand the pace of the game is better. I'm not arguing with any of that. One thing I will say, though, as a fan at these games, you feel like you pushed out a little bit. I went to an Astros game on Friday, walked around that stadium. The game was about 2.5 hours. I looked up. I started walking around the third inning. Next thing I knew was bottom of the seventh. I didn't know where everything went. Time flew. So at the ballpark, I think it takes away from a little bit of that fan experience. Baseball is one of those games. The beauty of it is it's casual. You're not going to, you can, go get your food, come back. You're not going to miss too much. You can follow along. And I think this is taken away from the in-fan experience a little bit, but it's the business side. They cater to the casual fan. Now I understand all that. So you just, you got to get the Shake Shack a little bit earlier, people. That's my moral of the story here. Go to the first inning instead of the second inning. So you get a little bit more time to the seats, I guess, but it is working very well. So, as a whole, it's fine. I think in a month or so, we'll really see, like you're saying, numbers wise, when they dig in a little bit, they'll probably make some more tweaks, but they're doing what they want. Just hopefully it works out for the Mets, I guess. That's the only thing I got there. But you're talking about sponsorship of the pitch clock. The Mets sneakily announced that they were going to have a uniform patch this year, starting tomorrow, I believe, the home opener. It's New York Presbyterian Hospital. Going to be, I don't know if it's on the left or the right sleeve. I'm assuming the right because the Mets patch is usually on the left. It's a giant eyesore, and Steve Cohen, sneaky, snuck that in kind of last minute so nobody could complain about it too much. I guess I just want to get your thoughts. Finally, the ugly uniform sponsorships have made its way to Flushing.
Yeah, so I mean, initially, like when the press release came out, I'm like, okay. I mean, the jokes wrote themselves, right? Like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Mets
yeah.
are the Mets are sponsoring, creating a sponsorship deal with the hospital. Like, yeah, of course they are because they're going to get discounts, all that type of stuff you saw on Twitter. And I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in there between the fact that the Mets are going to combine with New York Presbyterian for they're going to host health and wellness events and
Right.
cancer screenings and blood drives, and every Mets fan that's born at New York Presbyterian, um, every toddler gets a onesie, a Mets
Nice.
onesie, and there's a bunch of good stuff in there. Um, and overall, I would say, look, patches, advertisements on
Mhm.
jerseys. We mentioned this a while ago
Yeah,
when it first came up. Like it's just part of sports. Like
right.
if you watch any other sport, you see it, and it's really not that big of a deal once you get used to it. All of that said, when the Mets put out the picture of the actual patch,
Ugly.
I couldn't believe it. It's my first thing was there was more than one person that approved this. And how? How was them it it's so big and then the text of it is so small. There's
It's
so
red.
much dead space.
Yep.
There's so much dead space that it's just it looks like I made it and I have no artistic ability whatsoever. It looks like I made it and put it on there and jumbo sized it like the Met scoreboard. Um, it looks like they did one of the new large bases and threw it on the shoulder as a patch. It's just I'm hoping that the make again, we're talking about adjustments here. I
Yep.
hope the Mets make some adjustments
Yeah.
and shrink it up to fit the text.
Yeah.
Because once we found out who it was going to be, you knew that it was going to be red and white because
Right.
that's
That's
their
their yeah,
colors.
right.
So
Yep.
you knew we knew it was going to clash a little bit with what the Mets have the on their uniforms. So for it to come out like that, it's just a lot of white and it's just too big and
Yeah.
it's just awful. I mean, I don't think there's one good thing you can say about the actual patch itself.
No, yeah. All I can say is hopefully once it goes on, maybe it'll get him healthy. Maybe it'll be good mojo or something. That's all we can hope for because it's a giant eyesore. I agree. I don't know who approved it, but maybe they'll shrink that thing down. Maybe Nike can help them out somebody because if I got to stare at that thing all year on these hitters, it's gonna get ugly real quick. It's not the best looking thing in the world. And again, we know their colors are white and red, but like maybe could have made an adjustment so it matched the colors of the team or something. Like Motorola has a giant M on the Padres uniform. It's brown. They made it match the Padres uniform, something like that. But yeah, like you said, this is all a game of adjustments here. This first month of the season. Hopefully, the Mets do the same thing with that uniform. But going from the Major League uniform to the AAA uniform down in Syracuse. Obviously, we talked about Alvarez getting called up here now. You mentioned Beatty a little bit with that thumb. Just want to get an update on him and the rest of kind of now it's the core three down there. Mauricio seems to be raking and going crazy. So just want to give us an update of these young guys down in Syracuse for us.
Yep. So I mean, we started with Alvarez. He had a great start. Now he's going to be up in the big leagues. Like we both kind of talked about already. The big thing will be to just watch, see how much playing time he gets.
Mm-hmm.
You have to imagine if you're calling him up. I mean, the Mets didn't have a ton of other options.
Right.
Their other catcher in AAA is Michael Perez,
Mm-hmm.
he's Michael Perez. I don't think we need to get into that.
Sure.
And he wasn't on the 40-man roster, so that
Right.
would have been another move. Alvarez is already on the 40, so not only is it the easy move, but it's obviously the higher upside move. But he's your top prospect. He needs to play. I was kind of surprised when Mike Puma tweeted out that they're still going to start Tomas Nido in the home opener. It's just like, it doesn't make a ton of sense to me. Like, Alvarez is here to play.
Right.
Let him play. That's what he should be doing. And it doesn't always have to be a catcher. They
Right.
need a DH versus lefties. I mean,
Right.
Tommy Pham
No.
probably isn't going to be terribly productive in that situation.
But he can see
So
now. But he can see
yeah,
now, Mike.
yeah, he
So
can.
maybe he'll be better.
Let's hope. But yeah, so Alvarez catches 4 games a week, and he
Hmm.
DHs in another one or two, depending on
Right.
the pitching matchups. He's got to get at bats. That's what he's got to do, and I think you got to do it early and often and see what he's going to do. Yeah, and then to Beatty. Beatty looked great to start the year. The little thumb issue is It's kind of postponed him just very slightly.
Sure.
Like I said, he's supposed to be back in lineup Friday, and again, I don't want to harp on it too much, but assuming he's hitting, the Mets have to make a decision there for third base, and I would like to see him do it soon,
Yeah. Yeah.
sooner than rather than later, and even more so. I mean, there has to be some sense of urgency at some point
Yeah.
if the offense continues to flutter as a
Yep.
group. You can't keep scoring 2, 3 runs a game. Um, so you have to make a move there. And then, I mean, if you don't make a move with Beatty and you don't want to DH Alvarez, which is a question because Buck seemingly doesn't really like the idea of DHing a catcher, he said in the past, without having a third catcher. Um, Brings you to Mark Vientos. Had another home run today. He's got, I think it's 10 or 11 batted balls um, over 100 miles per hour
Wow.
already, and 5 over 110 already. The strikeouts are still a little high, about 33% of the time, but I think that's the type of hitter we're going to get from Vientos. He's a guy that's going to strike out a fair amount, but he has serious pop. And I think one thing to remember with Vientos, which is a stat that I tweeted out last year, is that he is very good against high velocity.
Hmm.
He had an OPS over 1,000 last year against 95 plus fastballs, which is obviously a lot of what you see in the big leagues now.
Yep.
So I think that's important to note. And I think the fact that in the past he's kind of hit righties and lefties both pretty well. So the Mets, again, if they continue to not have success from the DH position, Vientos is there. He's option. He's on the 40. And then I think kind of the guy who's become the wild card of all of this is Ronnie Mauricio. Um, After last year, he had a really great power year in Double A last year, but no one was really talking about him because he had an on base percentage under 300 for the second straight year, and he'd be kind of started slipping on prospect boards. He went to the Dominican Republic, was MVP, came to spring camp, looked great, looked
Yep.
like he added even a little bit more muscle, um, and hit 4 home runs this spring. Um, he was slated for AAA. I mean, there's no real reason to expect him to be in the big leagues. So what has he done? Well, he turned 22 the other day, had an RBI triple on his birthday. The next day, had 2 home runs in the game, one from each side of the plate, and then tonight again another home run. So he's got 5 extra base hits in 6 games for Syracuse. Um, I mean, it, it's a ton of power, and again, we've talked about it with the Mets. That's what they need. I guess the curious thing is, at what point does he play somewhere else?
Yeah.
At what point are we talking about? Well, this is Mauricio showing that he's big league ready from at least a power standpoint,
Right.
and we want to see that power in the big leagues. So where are we going to play him? I think that becomes the big question now. Um, Obviously, you still want to see Mauricio get on base at a higher clip.
Hmm.
Ultimately, that'll kind of decide what his future is as a major leaguer offensively. Um, but I think the bigger question is he's still playing short for Syracuse.
Right.
He's never going to play short for the Mets unless something really weird happens that we can't even think of right now. So, and third base, essentially, you have Escobar, who they seemingly like. They have Guillorme and they have Beatty, who we've already been talking about as the long-term answer there. So where are we putting Mauricio? I've continued to say that I
Corner
would put him
outfield.
in the corner outfield.
Yep.
Um, Mauricio, the first day, right on media day, they asked him because I mean that's an obvious question to ask him is where do you want to play? And Mauricio said, I will want to play wherever gets me to the big leagues. So this is a kid that is knows he's close to the big leagues and knows that he's not going to play shortstop in the big
Right.
leagues, at least for the Mets. So he knows that he needs to be open to playing other positions. He played some third and some second in winter ball, but I guess I'm going to harp on it until we see it happen. At least is I think we need to see Mauricio get some reps in the outfield. I know I've talked to some Mets folks and they're kind of quiet about quiet about what their really thought process is.
Sure.
Part of it I know is they want him to be comfortable offensively, which is
Right.
that's perfectly reasonable. That he, like I said, he just turned 22. That he's still a young kid. You want him to be comfortable at his position so that he's comfortable at the plate offensively and not thinking about a lot of stuff because you know that there's still work to be done there offensively. But at some point, what I'm really getting to is when is it going to help at the big league level? And if it's soon, it's not going to be at shortstop. So you
Right.
need to at least get him some reps and looks at other positions.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, to me, it's either Beatty or Mauricio learning how to play third base in the outfield, and like you said, it seems like it's going to be Beatty's that long term answer at third base. So, hey, left field, right field, step on up, man. You know, if that back keeps playing like that again, you want to, he's saying all the right things, but the Mets are going to have to commit to that as well, like you're saying. You want to keep him comfortable offensively. I do also understand that. But again, if you're big league club offensive struggling and this kid is showing that he's ready power wise to contribute up here, then you got to find the spot where he can play most every day. And, it doesn't hurt to play third base if they don't want to bring up Beatty yet or something like that. But yeah, we're in agreement. Corner outfield seems like that's the spot for him, long term if he can get up here and do something. So, hopefully all these guys force the Mets hand, right? Not just Alvarez and Beatty, Mauricio too. Hope and Vientos as well. They hope they, force all the Mets hands, and at some point maybe they're all contributing for the team this year, gives them a shot in the arm. But it'll be interesting. It's crazy that Mauricio's only 22. I feel like we've been talking about him and Alvarez for so long, being prospects for the Mets. So, it'll be interesting, cool to see when he finally comes knocking on the door to the big leagues here. But I think that's gonna wrap it up for us this week.
Nope,
No,
nope.
one more
I'm gonna
thing.
I'm gonna interrupt you
Sure.
because minor league opening day is on Friday.
There we go.
So all four of the Mets full season affiliates will be playing. So
Nice.
I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of prospects to watch or prospect positions to watch at
Okay.
each level. AAA Syracuse, we've pretty much handled that quite a bit. AA Binghamton, really, they played tonight and lost in their opener. They lost to the Portland Sea Dogs. They're in Maine actually playing. Uh, but the biggest thing I would watch is the rotation there. They have Mike Vassell and Dominic
Okay.
Hamill, um, two of their better pitching prospects. I have Vassell as the number 9 prospect in the Mets system, and I think I have Hamill 10 or 11 right now. So that's obviously a spot to watch. And Junior Santos is in that rotation too. Big 6'7" kid who throws 96, 97. He just, despite that, hasn't missed a ton of bats yet. So that rotation is definitely the one to watch for Binghamton. Go down a level to Brooklyn, and it's definitely the outfield. You have Alex Ramirez in center field, one of the Mets' top 5 or 6 prospects. He had a great spring. I mean, he showed well in big league camp, and Buck talked about him quite often about how impressed he was with both sides of the ball. And the rest of the outfield, they have Omar De Los Santos, who stole 70 bases last year, was the Florida State MVP. And then the other outfielder is Stanley Consuegra, who probably, I mean, outside of the big guys we talked about at Syracuse, post the highest exit velos in the Met system. and has some of the best raw power in the system, and also has a cannon in right field. The dude had 18 outfield assists last year.
Wow.
So the outfield in Brooklyn is definitely the one to watch. And then you go down to St. Lucie, and it's the rotation again. And this is a clear one. I mean, they have four guys in my top 30 prospects. Lionel Ovalis, a young right-hander that pitched a little bit in St. Lucie last year. He's been up to 97. Um, Brings in a good curveball too. Young guy to watch. Javier Astencio, a lefty that gets it up to 95. He pitched pretty well in St. Lucie last year as a teenager, so he's one to watch. Jordani Ventura. He's kind of a guy that has battled through some injuries and he's healthy again. He's actually going to start on opening day for St. Lucie. And then Felipe de la Cruz, who I'm actually in the process of writing an article about, because he was one of the best guys in Mets minor league camp. And he pitched at the very end of the year for St. Lucie last year. And he's a lefty, only 21 years old, and actually hit 97 in the playoffs for St. Lucie last
Wow.
year. So, I mean, anytime we're talking about a left-hander hitting 97, that's something they get excited about. And he's got a pretty good changeup that he got a lot of swings and misses late in the year. So that's one to keep an eye on. And Wilmy Ramirez is in that rotation too, another top 30 Mets prospect. And he was actually the the Florida Coast League pitcher of the year. He had an ERA under 1 for the whole year. So definitely a good rotation. Another thing to keep an eye on as the St. Lucie Mets are coming off winning the Florida State League last year. So, yeah, Friday, they're all in action. You got the Mets home opener, and you got all the minor league teams playing on the same day. Doesn't get much better than that for baseball.
No, absolutely. And in Brooklyn too, there's Kevin Parada, right? The catcher as well.
Yes. Yeah,
Nice.
sorry. I skipped over Parada. I got so excited to talk about that outfield Parada in Brooklyn. I mean, obviously, outside of the big guys in Syracuse, he's actually the Mets' third overall prospect.
Right.
And
Right.
you're right. I skipped over Jet Williams, who was picked right after him. Jet Williams is going to start the year with that St. Lucie
Wow.
rotation, playing the starting shortstop for them. So, I mean, St. Lucie gets stacked again after winning it. So fans down there are pretty lucky at the guys they're going to get to watch to start the year. And like you said, yeah, Brooklyn, between that outfield and
Hmm.
Parada, and they have some other pitching arms that got drafted last year. They should have a pretty good team in Brooklyn as well.
Yeah, going to be a fun year in the minor leagues, like we've talked about. I feel like forever now, and had people on within the organization. Future's bright down there. They got a lot of hopefully future studs, and going to be a nice day of baseball tomorrow. Like you said, I hope everybody enjoys the home opener. Hopefully the Mets get a night's win, and we'll catch up with you next week for everything in between. So until then, guys, let's go Mets.